Google caves into pressure in the UK. It says it's adopting stricter advertising rules to combat harmful and inappropriate content. But who's to decide which content should be removed? And can anyone control what's published online? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Now, Google is one of the biggest companies in the world, but that doesn't make it invincible. And this latest controversy in the United Kingdom is hitting where it hurts, in the wallet. The British government and several big businesses, including Audi and McDonalds, have pulled their advertising from Google sites like YouTube. They've confronted the company for playing their ads next to videos that they consider to be extreme, ones that provoke violence or hate speech. And this is a situation that has global implications. Google has already apologised and promised to take a tougher stance on hateful, offensive and derogatory content. Well, that includes changing its policy to give advertisers more control. Google has also expanded its definition of hate speech and says it'll be using the latest artificial intelligence tools to tackle the issue. But the task ahead is not easy. Social media sites have been under a lot of pressure to remove fake news and inappropriate content, and it seems they're struggling to find the balance between necessary censorship and overdoing it. YouTube was under fire this week for removing LGBT content as allegedly inappropriate. Last October, Facebook removed a Swedish video about breast cancer because it featured cartoon depictions of naked women. Facebook later apologised and then reposted the video. And Twitter's had its problems too. A tweet late last year falsely claimed that Hillary Clinton was involved in a child sex ring in a Washington, D.C. pizza restaurant. Well, the rumour went viral, and one man who actually believed it stormed the restaurant armed with a gun. All right, let's introduce our guests now. Joining us from Berlin on Skype is Stephanie Hankey, Executive Director and co-founder of the Tactical Technology Collective, which helps activists, journalists and NGOs use digital technologies in their work. Also in Berlin, we have Matthew Stender, a technology ethicist and a project strategist for onlinecensorship.org. That's a website that allows social media users to report incidents of content being taken down across social media platforms. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Can I start with you, Stephanie, and find out from you how Google got itself into hot water with the British government? It was for allowing the British government's adverts to appear on alongside video and other kinds of content that it considers to be unpleasant and even extreme. So how did Google allow this?
It's not just the British government. There are a number of, and what came after that was a number of large companies in the UK, like Marks and Spencers and Boots, and also some other media channels who reacted to this these kind of investigations and news, looking around the question of how advertising works on YouTube. So, for example, if you have a very popular video at the beginning, as everybody knows, you usually see a small advert, and those adverts are placed on the basis of a logic which is automated very often. So, for example, it's done on the basis of popularity. So, some of the very popular sites that were being automatically placed adverts for these companies and from the UK government were extremist content, and that's where the controversy came from. One of the problems that's raised quite quickly, obviously, especially in the case of the UK government, is some of those websites and some of those, YouTube videos were actually from people, for example, who were banned for entering the UK, but through YouTube get quite a large-scale audience. So it wasn't just the kind of association, let's say, between companies and the government and so on, these particular issues, which in that context doesn't look good, as you can imagine, but it's also the question around the embarrassment of the relationship between that content.
Yeah, understood. So what did Google do wrong?
I think that what they do, I don't know if they do it wrong, but in general they have a problem. I think they have a problem of figuring out ways to place adverts on massive amounts of information whilst vetting the content. I mean, they themselves point out that about 400 videos are uploaded to YouTube every minute, and they can't stand in the middle in terms of putting people in place to vet that. But the way in which they're selling advertising is probably the issue. So that's often done through automated exchanges, sort of bidding, live bidding, where a publisher might say, I've got these slots available. Advertising agencies use an exchange to then place adverts without looking at the content itself, but looking at things like popularity. So the logic that they're using to place these adverts is creating a lot of the problem.
All right, and Matthew, now Google has promised to broaden its definition of what is offensive and what is unpleasant, and therefore promising to take down more of this kind of material. But who's to say what is offensive, what should not be on the internet? Who decides, who deems what is unacceptable?
Well, I think that's the $100 billion question. Just like art, who gets to call it art? Who gets to call it offensive content? Right now, Silicon Valley, where most of these major companies are, have been comfortable having a global content standard. Maybe they'll have some ability to have age-restricted content, but right now I think one of the issues is there lacks in the new emerging global ecosystem of technology companies rivaling nation states for kind of top-tier international status of a moral authority. And because these companies are profit-driven, it's difficult for them to both, on one hand, be able to be the moral authority to create filters or create content standards that appeal to their entire user base, while still trying to maximize the data and analytics they have
Matthew,
to increase revenue. So
Matthew, explain for us, if you would, what is the process by which material, offensive or otherwise, is taken down? Because of course this is the area of online that you specialise in. How is material taken down, and what is the process? How long does it take, for instance?
there's a few ways that content's taken down. One is by flagging, and most platforms now allow users to flag content they feel offensive. In most cases, this will go to a human content moderator, which will say, yes, this is something that violates our terms of service or our community guidelines, or no, it's actually okay. We've seen a little bit of abuse around even flagging, mass flagging or flagging campaigns. So that, although it's not perfect, there's still a human interlocker in the mix. Companies are able also to mass flag certain content. On YouTube, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA, is used by companies, which is problematic in its own for a number of reasons, but they have enabled content owners to be able to flag things like songs that may appear or other copyrighted intellectual property.
And when an item, sorry Matthew, when an item is actually flagged and then is referred to this panel or to this adjudicator, if you like, how long is does that process take before it is decided whether to take it down or not?
It varies by platform. Because these platforms have so much content running through it, it is difficult for humans. We don't have as far as the transparency around what the dashboards look like of social media monitors and the actual tools that are being used. It's quite opaque. These services or the content moderation policies. There is, especially in Europe and in Germany in particular, Germany has said that Facebook and Google and the large companies are not doing this quick enough, that they've set a 24-hour deadline to say that content should be removed, and that Facebook and Google are not doing it quick enough, and so that with the new proposed legislation to fine companies per each use or each piece of content that was not taken down. So it varies, and even by region by region as well, because maybe depending on the language that the content is in, you need people that speak a particular language, whether it be Arabic or Farsi or English, and so even the teams, the size of the teams vary by region.
Stephanie, it sounds very much as though these huge corporations that we're talking about, Google, Facebook, Twitter, less so, but still, it sounds very much as though they rely rather heavily upon automation, upon these much famed algorithms, instead of upon human resources, because from the process that Matthew has just described, it sounds very much as though there's a nuance of judgment that is required so often, which cannot come from a machine.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think one of the problems we're seeing is the limits of algorithms, let's say, is they aren't necessarily good at judgment, and they work on a logic. So the logics that a lot of these companies are using are not necessarily showing themselves to be right. And what we're seeing now are the symptoms of the problems with those algorithms. And this, in a sense, is very similar to the fake news stories that happened around the US elections, where basically content's made more popular, but considered more important based on how popular it is. Whereas people share content, for example, in the case of the fake news stories, based on the fact that it might be funny or strange or unusual, not just the fact that it's valid or true. And so the logic they were using in that case, and this is where sort of the controversy came, elevated a lot of information to people, a lot of news stories to people that was not true. And now you're seeing the same kind of problem with this set of advertising. And the root of this is the kind of problem of these companies. One is the fact that they don't want to be classified as media companies. If they do more editorial control, more curation, as Matthew's saying, then they get put in a different category and they have to become media entities in a way and regulated as such with editorial control. Or they get classed as censors, where they start stepping in and making mistakes about what should and shouldn't be allowed, what makes them the right people to judge that process. So that's one of the major problems with this issue. At the other side of it, if they're too neutral and they're too machine-based, then they're running into problems with the logic and how it's working. So I think what right now they're doing is realizing that their platforms do have a massive influence on not only the advertising space, but also the media discussion, and that's creating all kinds of new issues for them.
And Matthew, it sounds very much as though these companies actually need to invest in themselves, invest in their product in order to clean up their act.
I agree. I think that we can't make light of how much content this is. It's really a mountain of content every moment coming across the servers of these platforms. But these companies, Facebook and Google alone, now account for almost 75% of the advertising and the digital advertising. And when you're a company making $10 to $25 billion a quarter, there's a discrepancy between the amount of investment for tooling and training of teams, the development of new technologies that have a nuance, that are able to parse nuance. But as of now, many of the companies are using even third-party contractors, and so in certain cases, these content moderators are not even in-house actual employees; they're third-party contractors.
And Stephanie, I'm just now looking at a quote from Yvette Cooper, the British politician who's been at the forefront of this dispute with Google. She says that Google needs to make a commitment to proactively searching content for material from, quote, terrorist or illegal organisations. Is that something that Google is actually set up to do? Can it feasibly do this?
Well, I mean, I think I wouldn't like to be in their position. If they start making those kinds of decisions, as has happened before. I mean, you get this, a lot. For example, with Facebook, have made a lot of mistakes in that sense. That once they start overstepping the mark, they're in a different realm. And once you start also looking at different political contexts, what's okay in one place may not be in another. And that's been some of the debates over things like censorship, over things like nudity or sexuality or whatever. So I think they shouldn't really get into that situation. And I think maybe it's worth saying that these things look like technical issues, and I think they kind of raising their head and coming about because there are technical challenges that have created this situation. But I think we shouldn't underestimate how much they're just a symptom of broader social and political problems. So, for example, Facebook and Google's dealing with this touches on big questions around freedom of expression. If they're making themselves out to be a neutral platform and they believe in freedom of expression, then one has to ask the question, what is the limit to freedom of expression? And this is not a technical question. And the same goes for some of the logics. So, how are these videos becoming really so popular that they're getting advertising in front of them, from L'Oreal or Marks and Spencer's or Boots or whatever. This is happening essentially because there's so many people watching them. You get some of those videos that were mentioned in the research, 30 million visits for extremist content. What does that tell us about what's happening in society in general, not just with the technology companies?
OK, Nishanth Sastry joins us now. He's Senior Lecturer in Informatics at King's College London. And thank you for joining us, Nishanth. We're just getting on to the issue of censorship, for that is what it is. Google is being reprimanded by the UK government and is being told, in no uncertain terms, pull down some of this offensive material that is on your sites. And I'm just wondering, how does a huge global corporation like Google, like Facebook, how do they decide to censor a certain item? Because, of course, different parts of the world deem different things to be offensive.
No, yes, this is a big problem, but I think Google and Facebook and the likes have a solution for things like this, have had a solution for things like this for a long time. For copyrighted content, certain content is distributed or distributable in certain places of the world, perhaps not in other places of the world. And there are mechanisms in place. You might go to a YouTube video of a clip from, let's say, a show in the United States, and you're watching it from the United Kingdom, and then it'll say you're not able to watch this. So there are good mechanisms in place for enabling this. If they need to do this, technically, it shouldn't be a big deal to do it.
All right, well, let's just take a look now at how these internet giants actually control content on the web. About 400 hours of video, as you've already heard, is uploaded to YouTube every minute. That's a huge amount, isn't it? And 98% of flagged content is reviewed by the company within 24 hours. And under pressure to remove what many call fake news, Google's started to identify and label fact-checked articles in the US and in some European countries. Now, Facebook also has implemented a similar policy. It says it now only promotes articles that it deems accurate. But critics say Facebook choices indicate bias. So, Matthew, coming to you now, it's almost as if they can't win, can they? If they strive to take down material that many people find offensive, others will say that they're exercising censorship.
Well, as Stephanie mentioned earlier, there's been a resistance from the companies to label themselves as media companies. And I think that this is part of the problem. They're trying to walk a perhaps impossible line, that they're trying to be a neutral technology company or a technology company while also controlling the content that flows through much of the content that is in front of people's eyes around the world. What these companies deem to be appropriate is, I think, also something that needs to be deconstructed. When companies only have a single global content standard, when Facebook in particular has created a content moderation policy based on the perhaps most easily offendable locations in the world, the places in which that might not, where, I don't know, Saudi Arabia and Denmark, for instance, have two very different cultures and socio-cultural climates. And by creating a global content standard that's enforced from the top down to be able to somehow placate, the entire planet is to me is not so much of a feasible ask for these companies, even internally. So, if they're going to insist that they are just technology companies, then I think that we need to address that as an issue. But if we are saying that actually they have passed a threshold into the media space, that they now are, by even choosing through their algorithms what content comes across our feeds or in our search or what's next in the playlists on our video streaming services, then they are in essence curators of media.
And Nishanth, I'm just reminded of the instance of Google some years ago, the way it interacted with the Chinese authorities, unwilling to let go of this huge market. I mean, there are twice as many internet users in China as entire the entire population of the United States. So they modified their policies, didn't they, in order to accommodate the Chinese regulatory requirements. And they were given quite a lot of flack for that, weren't they?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think in the end, what you need to remember is that these big companies actually derive their revenue from ads, and ads are there because there are users. And to the extent that the users are controlled by certain regimes, they need to make sure, these companies like Google and Facebook, being multinational companies, they need to make sure that they comply with what's considered legal, what's considered useful in different countries. And so they need to introduce different standards for different countries. And they do make a change depending on the needs of the moment, as it were.
And Stephanie, so having identified all of these regional frameworks that are put in place in order to accommodate the local tastes and whatever, how is it that some of the most depraved material actually gets onto the internet, that so many of us, our kids, our grannies, can actually see? They can see beheadings, they can see all sorts of terrible, despicable things enacted, sometimes even live. There's a case in Chicago where a teenage girl is being gang raped on Facebook live stream. I mean, how is it that this can enter the internet and indeed have a life on the internet for some time?
Well, I mean, it enters the internet, as we all know, because we all upload things all the time. And so I think that's just the natural process of how it works and how it's designed in the first place. I think the question that you're raising, which is important, is the question of contested content in general. So not necessarily just, for example, extremist content, but also sexualized content or anything that people deem to be problematic. And that's the space in which we're working with when we use the internet. I think the problem with the companies is they really are between a rock and a hard place, in the sense that they can't do any right. I think if they go heavy on regulation censorship, they're going to look like and have to step in and make decisions that are difficult and may actually cause other problems. On the other hand, if they stay neutral, they're going to lose user trust and also lose that advertising revenue. So they have to do something. And I think that's what we're seeing now, not only with this, but other scandals that have been happening around these kinds of issues this year in particular, is this kind of, wisdom that great power brings great responsibility. And that's where they are. Those companies have become so important to our daily lives and are so wealthy and have benefited so much from something like advertising that they're now having to pay the costs, and that's difficult for them. And just to say, that's kind of created an interesting struggle with the media, who, from which they've starved sort of the advertising revenue, who are now, I think, probably enjoying and should enjoy the fact that right now they're looking like this debate over something like reach and popularity over something like quality has become really complex, and the media may benefit from that. I mean, the traditional media.
And Nishanth, earlier Matthew made mention of the distinction between these enormous companies being either media companies or tech companies. Why does that matter?
So as tech companies, they would just be providers of platforms, of a platform for users to express themselves, and that's been the big major change which has happened from before. So before, the news that you would get was governed by certain editors who would decide what goes online and what gets presented to people. But now anyone, anywhere can upload content. So then that becomes a platform for users to upload their content. But if they're media companies, then somehow they are in charge of deciding what content goes on where, and to the extent that they need to comply with and operate in different countries, they need to make sure that their content complies with the policies of those nations, right? So that they become media companies there. So that's the distinction between media companies and tech companies, whether it's just a single platform for users or whether it's companies that are promoting content and then they become owners of the content in some sense or fashion.
At this point, we've come to the end of the show. Thank you all very much indeed. Stephanie Hankey, Nishanth Sastry and Matthew Stender. Thank you all. And thank you for watching as well. You can see the programme again anytime you like by going to the website aljazeera.com. If you want more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can always join the conversation, if you dare, on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Martine Dennis, and the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.